environmental, health and safety, and social programs, as well as management systems in over 100 individual facilities for corporate-wide operations. He has also developed and implemented the best practices for several top Indian firms in areas of improved operational efficiency, good EHS practices, and enhanced compliance management. Today, Shikhar will be talking about the various innovations and advancements in carbon footprint reduction and GHG emissions, as well as achieving net zero in India and across the world. So over to you, Shikhar, now. Please unmute yourself.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Deepika. Thanks for the introduction. So a very good afternoon to all of you. And as I understood is that this webinar for an hour or so, an interaction with all of you is part of the ESG week celebration that you are doing, which is a very good initiative, I should say, at the company-wide level that you are doing. As Deepika mentioned, we have two parts of this particular session. One is just a bit of update on what's happening in ESG, both in India and across the world, which I would be covering in next 15-20 minutes, which will be followed by my colleague Arun, who will be further then taking you on to the carbon management part and what's the update in the carbon space which is going on. And then towards the end, we will like to have some question and answers if the time permits. But my request to all of you is to, one, of course, because that's an internal session, if all of you are on mute, then it would be good. Nobody gets disturbed. Second is that don't wait till question and answers to ask the question. Keep posting it into the chat so that one of us, either me or Arun, can respond to it, so that we don't wait till the end. In the end, we can keep some clarification that you want that we can do. So these are two requests that I have, and hopefully this is an interactive session. Let's see how well we can cover the topics. Just give me a minute. I will just share my sort of slides with you. Yeah. So 1 minute. Okay. So I will start with the ESG, although the week is going on for your celebration or your sort of update on it. Very quickly, I will glance through what is happening in the ESG space. All of you know about the social, environment, and governance part that ESG comprises of. But how it is different from what is happening as of now. And I saw your journey as GSCL on sustainability in CSR, on IR that you are doing, and where is this ESG piece now getting fit up. So there are three components which you might have already learned about: the environmental part, the social, and governance. Generally, ESG has two important components that you will see towards the right hand of this screen. One is about the ESG performance for the company. So you might have heard lately that many companies on ESG are getting rated by some foreign sort of rating agencies, and also in India, very recently, CRISIL has also rated around 500 Indian companies on ESG. So one component of ESG is about the ESG performance based on the information that the company has posted in the public domain. So generally, these are secondary based informations, and some of the rating agencies might like to also approach you for the primary data clarification. So I think from ESG, two things are very important. One is ESG for companies, the factors which have the potential to impact the business continuity, financial performance, or which may serve as an opportunity for business for future growth. So I think how well you sort of integrate ESG as a part of your business model is what basically now the rating agencies are looking for. Another important part which is going to emerge in India is the capital markets. And this is it's on the same lines that in US and in the Europe, in the mature market, it has happened. Once the companies start getting the ESG rated, then there are ESG related capital markets requirement also, which means is like the example of DJSI, which is Dow Jones Sustainability Index, which have been in US for almost 22 years now. Similarly, in Europe also they have the ESG index. On the same lines in India, both the Indian Stock Exchange, that is the NSE and the BSE, have also launched their respective ESG indices. So important part for us is that what do the stock market looks is the risk caused by the bad ESG performance or the business opportunities which are created by the proactive ESG performance. So I think this complete debate of ESG is peripheral around investors, capital markets, ESG performance, which has become a buzzword from 2017 and more during these 2 years of 2020 and 2021. Despite of this, there are three major components, as most of you understand. On the environment, I think one of the key pillars is about climate change and the resource efficiency, which we'll be covering in the next presentation that Arun covers. In the social, it is more about the relationship and about the social connect between the employees, the well-being of the employees, the supply chain, customers, and community. Basically, it is across your value chain. Another important part of ESG is that we are not only looking the four walls within the companies, but also the supply chain and also the larger value chain, which then includes your customers and logistics and everything. So that's about the social. And the last piece of governance is very important because it talks about what is the mechanism that has been put in place. So I was just looking at your IR structure, that how at the board level, which committee handles and provides you the direction for ESG targets, what are the new ESG projects that you are working on. So governance is all about your review of your performance as ESG and how it is internally reported within the organization. So this is what in nutshell is about ESG. If we move forward, these are some of the important things that most of the rating agencies, because as I said, that ESG is more driven by the capital markets, by the investors, by the financial providers, or by the capital providers. So largely what they are asking in the ESG pillar in the environment space is more on the carbon emissions. How do you dispose of your pollution in the way pollution control measures related to air, water, land, water discharges. Another important aspect is about the biodiversity assessments, if they have been carried out or not. And in case if you are in a water stress area, what are your plans for it, and how do you work on resource use efficiency, meaning the recycling, reuse of material, and that could lead to the replacement of the virgin material or certain reduction in the consumption part. So I think these are the basic things in environment that are looked in the environment part. In social is the human capital, which I think you have very well covered into your integrated report. Then the new labor codes which have come. So here, what in ESG is preferred always is that even if the codes are still at the state level yet to be implemented, but as a proactive company, you should see what could be the impacts of these labor codes on your business, uh, uh, countrywide or worldwide, and try to start already including them as the futuristic requirements that would be coming in. Product liability, most of you know that nowadays we have something called as extended producer responsibility from environment. So this is something which is cross-cutting between environment and social, that all the action that we are doing does not harms the public or the community at large. So do you have any product liability from the point of view of plastics or any other waste? And if you have seen the new waste management rules, talk about what is called as EPR, extended producer responsibility, in which you need to have a registration required by the CPCB and all, which is in a way that how do you take care of not only the disposal part, but also from the product point of view, any liability that can have an interface with the uh, customer, consumer, community, and the people which are involved in. any issues related to indigenous rights or the communities, the locals, and how do you maintain the relationship with the civil society? I think these are the important part. In the governance is all about business ethics, the whistleblower policy, how the business ethics works, so remuneration, incentives at the board level, anti-bribery, anti-corruption policies. Important is the internal systems and controls for the compliances, and then how do you meet the needs and expectation of the stakeholders. So these are some of the important points in the ESG which are covered. You might see them as more or less the same that you have been practicing either in GRI or in your IR. But the key thing of the ESG part is that how the capital providers look at this particular part. So either you see that these issues of ESG are already an assets to you. In a way, they improve your valuation. You show them that okay, this is the way we have been handling to these issues, and these are our proposed targets and goals which we want to achieve. But in case they are reactive in nature and you are not disclosing this information, then they will basically like to learn from you that what is that prevents you in disclosing these environment, social, and governance related parameters, and they might just try to rate you on a scale which you might not be accepting, because that's what general perception in the ESG ratings is. Most of the companies don't like the ratings which they receive from the external sort of agencies. These are some of the evaluations of ESG. Uh, Although the name or the ESG sounds a bit recent thing, but there had been the developments which have been taking place in various decades in 1890s, in 1993, 1980. We are seeing that how the things are happening both from the environment point of view. 1987 has been the biggest one where the Brundtland Commission defined sustainability and sustainable development. There had been case of the spills, there had been case where the stock markets started working on the ESG index funds. So this is a bit of the history what had been there in the past. Just fast tracking it, I think one of the important part over here is that more and more companies are now moving towards what is called a sustainable financial disclosure regulations, which are also coming up. And there are moves like ISSB and IFRS, which are trying to align non-financial reporting as very much a part of the annual report. But in your case, you are already bringing out your integrated annual report. So in a way, you have already merged your different capitals into your business model. Similarly, another risk to the brand at times is what we see, uh, not touching on the ESG part, but there had been cases where the civil society or there had been compliance related issues which try to sort of have the bad reputation and on the image of the brand. One important part of ESG is the brand reputation and how do you sort of safeguard it. And one important requirement is like if you have an exposure to IFC, which is the International Financial Corporation related funding, they generally call as safeguard standards. I think ESG in a way is like a safeguard standard for your brand and reputation if you are following it in the way so that there is no negative sort of uh, image that gets sort of distorted because of the poor ESG performance. Say, for example, many decisions from the extractive companies or from the companies where the supply chain is not taken care of. We see some activism starts happening in some part of the world or in some state, and then it tries to sort of start getting linked to the reputation and to the brand image. So I think that is very important in ESG is that how do we manage and maintain all this positive part about environment, social, and governance very much as a part of your business model is very key. Uh, Along with this, a very recent sort of development, if you see that there are 4 or 5 of these global developments which are taking place. One, of course, is during Davos, which is just happening or just happened, might be last week. As a part of the World Economic Forum, they generally release what is called as the Environment Global Risk Report. And if you see in the Global Risk Report of 2022, which is based on the sort of the global perception survey that World Economic Forum carries out. So out of these 10, 5 of them are directly connected to with the environmental risk, which then means is that the global fraternity is already sort of giving a perception that climate action, failure to take climate action, extreme weather conditions we have just recently witnessed, the heat waves and all, biodiversity loss, human environmental damage like the air emissions, water pollutions, the things that we face in the society, or there is a natural resource crisis from the point of view of getting the virgin material and all. So I think the key 5 risks are cited as environmental risks. So for any company anywhere in the world making a business model, there is a lot of dependence on the environmental issues, followed by certain societal issues like infectious diseases, social cohesion erosion, which is taking place between the civil society and the companies, livelihood crisis after the pandemic. So if you see, these are some of the important environment and the societal risk. The economic is only the debt crisis and the geopolitical confrontation, like the war situation that we are presently looking into. So this is which is very important, that when you are doing the so-called materiality from the ESG point of view for your business, how you sort of also try to reflect these global risks which have been identified. Might not be a risk for you, but if it is a material concern, definitely you need to have an action program that how do you try to minimize or eliminate this type of risks. Also, important part of ESG has been the complete sort of the investor-driven initiative. So if you see from 2006 till 2020 and continuing till 2022, this is a bit of the complex sort of the chart where you see that number of signatories. When I say number of signatories, these are the banks which are the signatories to UNPRI, which is the principle for responsible investments, and many assets under management and also the asset owners are sort of including ESG as one of the strategy or one of the key indicators for any merger and acquisitions, or even sort of looking into what part of the equity they need to pick into. And the reason for that is we have seen recently the complete climate debate, which is saying that what is the dependence on the fossil fuel or dependence on the coal for the organization is very important, and they are not ready to sort of support certain sort of energy related issues that we have locally. So I think this is where these type of investments are looking for more energy balance over sort of renewables, and also how we can reflect the resource efficiency part. So these are very pro environmental and social initiatives that most of the investors are now asking for, and these are the upfront conditions they request to the project proponent to sort of take care of. So I think these are some of the things that we should be aware of from the financial fraternity, which are coming from the ESG perspective. Another part over here is that if we see that globally, the G20 nations which are there are also promoting ESG. And this year, coming December, India would be the sort of presidency for G20. So I think there will be a lot of pressure on India also to demonstrate some of the good examples of ESG and how companies in India are adopting to the ESG practices, which have been sort of existing worldwide in the way of ratings or management frameworks and all. So I think this the map just is giving you a representative which the Bloomberg sort of prepares that which country is where from the point of view of ESG space. So we see that in India it is just picking up at this time, and I think it will be more matured market in coming 8 to 10 years, where the companies will sort of integrate ESG as a part of the decision making. If you have already done that, so you might be one of the market leaders which have already achieved that. Others are on the way, which are trying to look into that what could be certain areas which we need to improve. So many companies which we discuss in some time is about the climate part, the biodiversity part. They are already building up the projects on that to showcase what are their initiatives on these sort of things. Another important part is once you are able to reduce risk and sort of demonstrate that there are less negative impacts on your business, I think it is getting linked to the cost of capital, the availability of the capital, the stock price volatility which is there. There is, as of now, on the stock thing, we will cover it later because that's not the purpose for today's session. But in a very recent development, it has been seen is that those companies which are also listed on both NSE and BSE ESG are also slowly performing better than the sort of companies which are there on the larger on the larger Nifty and the BSE index. So I think this is how the graduation starts, that the companies start getting more sort of um what you call visibility once they are there on the ESG index. And as I said, that reputational risk is one of the major parts in ESG that the financial providers or the capital providers are always really concerned of. This is important part because where we are in ESG in our journey to sort of achieve it. So many companies started this as a trade-off, have a different financial report and a different sort of ESG report. But then some of the companies are at this stage where they've already started integrated. Like in your case, you already have an integrated financial and non-financial report, which is covering also the ESG aspects into it. Going further as an advanced part, it is the business strategy that you decide for yourself for 2023, 25, 2030. Even the financial performance gets linked to your ESG parts, so that many companies which are looking for the transition from the point of view of carbon to a low carbon sort of economy point of view, that's where they are linking that how environment and social initiatives, if better planned, can also improve the financial performance. And I think there are a number of examples around it. So I think that's where ESG at this time is. So we have to see that how ESG can become a decision making strategy in our organization rather than reactive, where we keep on doing certain initiatives which are there across the world and we keep on reporting on it. So I think it's all about reporting versus what are the key impacts that you want to create during the sort of implementation part of ESG. These are three important things. Before I support some examples where people are confused in the ESG, is about that there are something called as ESG mattresses, then there is something called as ESG disclosures, and then ESG framework. Most of the time, companies only look at the either the mattresses, meaning the rating agencies which are rating them, or the disclosures like you are doing on IR or GRI. And definitely you might be having some internal ESG framework, which sort of defines that this is the way we will be practicing it uniformly across both at the corporate and the unit level. If not, either of them have to be sort of the synced with each other. So it all starts with the matrices on which you are getting rated by the foreign agencies. How do you start sort of including those into your ESG disclosure? And then in the same way it goes into that what is the internal framework that you are following up. So if I give you some examples of ESG matrices, these are some of the examples of ESG matrices you might have heard, because if you are also getting rated on it, if you see, one of the most important is the DJSI. That's one of the matrices where the companies do get rated. So in your case, might be, I don't know whether you are a part of the DJSI Asia Emerging Index or something. But what is your rating from the DJSI perspective? Similarly, there are MSCI, which is sort of giving you rated. which also compares you with your peers in the same sector. Then there is a Bloomberg, which gives you a score out of 100. There is something very recently on the EcoVadis, which is on the supply chain integrity with regard to the data authentication and all. So important part over here showing you these examples is that most of the companies in Indian context are getting confused because there are a lot of ESG matrices over the years which have come up. So the key thing over here is that within your organization, what are the key sort of parameters as a part of the ESG metrics that you want to follow, and accordingly, you should see that how we can communicate the same thing across all the rating agencies which are providing us. So need not to just get confused by one particular rating agency and start changing your so-called the criteria of data collection and analysis. So I think these are some of the matrices. I will not cover much the Dow Jones and the MSCI because this we can cover later on. These are some of the ESG disclosures which have become mandatory or important. So one of the most important ESG disclosure which will come into action this year, where we are having a lot of discussion with the Indian companies, is the requirement of business responsibility and sustainability reporting, which is having three sections. There are 9 principles, and then there are two set of indicators: the essential indicators and the leadership indicators. So I think very recently, not recently, but at least a year back, May 10th, 2021, SEBI has launched BRSR and requested to the companies through the listing agreement, LODR, is that the top 1,000 companies from this very financial year 22-23 would be doing a transparent disclosure of the ESG related aspects as a part of BRSR, business responsibility and sustainability reporting. Other disclosures which many companies are also using, and some of them you might be also using, is the disclosure related to CDP, related to sustainability performance, that is GRI. And also, I'm not so much aware that whether you are a signatory to TCFD, which means is this is a global sort of framework which says that okay, on the climate discussion, what could be the risk to the financial performance, and that's what TCFD is all about. It is a task force on climate related financial disclosure. So we have to see that how we are looking for carbon neutrality or a net zero situation within our organization. How do we try to communicate that as a part of our disclosure to the wider audience? So these are basically the second set is called as the disclosures. So earlier we discussed about the so-called the matrices which were given by the rating agencies. This is the disclosure that the organizations do, and I think both of them lead to certain important things that you should be aware of. Just a quick review of what is happening in the Indian space right from 2009 till 2021. It all started with the national voluntary guidelines which were issued by Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Then it became mandatory in the way that the SEBI started asking the 100 top listed to include within their annual report something called as BRR, business responsibility reporting. In 2014, they also started on the CSR Act and rules, and then asked for sort of the complete portal today, which is there, where we sort of give the impact based of the social projects that we have undertaken. Then this leads into the extension of BRR to 500 companies, introduction of IR as a voluntary requirement. 2019, finally, had been a release of NGRBC, which is National Guidelines for Responsible Business Conduct. And basis this National Guidelines for Business Conduct, I think SEBI adopted this and converted the NGRBC into what we learn today is the BRSR. The only thing is that the BRSR in 2021 mandates the 1,000 top listed companies. So in one go, VRR started with the graduation of 100 to 500 to 1,000. But in case of BRSR, which is a ESG based framework that SEBI has developed, it is asking the 1,000 companies to disclose this information, and that's why it will become a very important information from this year onwards, financial year 22-23, when you put it into the public domain. So you need to be very clear on that particular aspect. So this is a bit of the history. And this is how the structure of Vrsr looks like. Obviously, you might be working this year on 22-23 report, or if you have in this year, that is 21-22, also having one sort of report, it is okay to issue that as well. So typically there are three sections in Vrsr. This is an Indian ESG framework, just what SEBI has launched. It talks about general disclosures, talks about management process disclosure, talks about principle based performance disclosure, which all areas you need to improve on. The key part over here is the distinction in section C, which talks about both sort of the essential indicators and the leadership indicators. So I think this is for the first time they're asking within the leadership that how do you provide opportunity for companies to present impacts and outcome expected, what is this to review in the leadership category. Questions will move towards the essential category. So I think important part over here is that as a part of the governance, what is the framework that the senior management sets up, so that there is something called as internal sort of a check that whether the people are doing right type of disclosures, and this is the message which is flown outside also or not. And the last part, before I hand it over to my colleague, is about the ESG framework. Generally, one missing link that we have seen in many organizations on ESG is that they are getting rated by ESG agencies. Second is uh, the disclosures that they are following is certainly a bit theoretical in nature, because the rating agencies are not able to articulate it better, but then that leads to the lower rating. And the third important part which you see on your screen is that most of the organization as a part of the internal management framework should have something called as ESG framework, which talks about leadership commitment. It talks about sort of materiality analysis, which has to be done at the plant level or at the corporate level. How does it merge with the risk management or the risk register that you have prepared? What could be the part of our strategy, and what all are the policies for us to adopt this particular ESG requirements, and then who reviews it? So I think this particular framework is more the framework that the senior management as a part of governance has to put in place, so that all the aspects related to ESG get collated and is kept informed to the board that this is how we service the production, whether the environmental performance and health and safety performance is improving or not. So these are some of the important things when it comes to ESG. These are the requirements in the given framework that I showed you. As CII, we have been sort of assisting the companies for enhancement of their scores from the ESG rating point of view. We are assisting companies from the point of view of the disclosures that they are doing, and recently the new disclosure, which is Vrsr, where we are working with the companies and we are seeing what are the challenges over there. And lastly is the established framework, if we are required to sort of develop a framework for ESG within the organizations. These are three important pillars which are important for all of you to note. Another initiative, before I pass it on to Arun, that CII has taken is about the driving corporate action for climate change. Because as CII, we felt post COP26 was that a very important part for corporate India is that rather than talking about climate change, we have to now say that we have to drive the corporate climate action. So you have to demonstrate what are the actions you are doing uh, on the climate. What we have done as CII is that we have just released something called as a climate action charter. There are four principles of this charter. One is about what are your emission targets reduction, how do you sort of work with your value chain on this particular part, how do you build the resilience part, and are there any options available for mobilizing green finance or not. So I think these are the principles, and then there is something called as How do you join the charter? You have to give a commitment to these principles. You have to just let us know what are your short-term, long-term sort of impacts or the targets that you are setting, modify your commitment and support your value chain. So it's a very simple model that we have kept, which is more a self-run maturity model that we have tried to prepare over here. And I encourage your company also to sort of sign the charter and become the member so that at least some initiatives that you can record, you can also demonstrate how you are improving your performance, not only on climate, but overall on ESG. And then these are certain things that we intend to do. We are preparing some toolkits. So in case we have your supply chain, we offer them sort of these services of self-assessment and hand holding almost free because it is the tool that we have developed. And we are also sort of getting involved with the state governments on the state action plan for both climate and biodiversity. I think these are very important. And another important part in the climate space is that there is, of course, a query which is there to develop the national carbon markets. So I think India is not far off from preparing its own emission inventories and all. So this is all what I have to say. What's an update of ESG across India? I will now pass it on to my colleague Arun to slowly dive down more into the climate related issues. And my request to all of you meanwhile is to just put your sort of queries, questions into the chat so that while Arun is sort of presenting, I can sort of answer most of your questions. So over to you, Arun, and you will be sharing your screen, Arun.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Just give me a moment.
Yeah.
Sir, is this visible?
Yeah, it's visible.
Yeah, Arun, it is visible. You can go ahead.
Yeah. So very good afternoon to one and all. To begin with, thanks for this opportunity for presenting related to GHG emissions inventory, Sbta targets and net zero at this forum. And
Okay, Arun, you can go ahead. Might be.
yeah, sure. So this is in continuation with the ESG discussion that we have been having, and GHG is an important part of the environment front in as far as ESG is concerned. And inside, no, like whenever we are talking about no, like, emissions inventory within an organizations, there are again
Arun, we are not able to hear you. Are you speaking, Arun?
Hello.
Yeah, he is speaking.
Arun,
We
are you
can
speaking
hear him.
or you are on mute?
No, sir. I'm. Is it audible? I'm on.
Yeah, we can hear him.
Yeah, I think we can hear him. Only he can be a
sorry.
little louder.
Might be.
Okay. Is this louder now?
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
good
Arun,
enough.
better.
Yeah.
Better. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. So, if you are talking about the inventory of any organization, most of us understand that we have three predominant classification of emissions for any organization whenever you are considering the boundary as such. And as we understand in GHCL, we have multiple businesses, so we have to evaluate in totality to see that what are the different categories of emissions, within an organization. And the scientific notation, what is generally used globally adopted is scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, which most of you might be aware of. But nevertheless, just for like discussion's sake, let me quickly briefly explain you what this is all about. When we are talking about scope 1 emissions, it is the direct emissions of the assets that is owned by an organization. These are your like boilers, furnace oils, generators, the refrigerant units if you are having one. And then apart from that, any direct fuel consumption that is happening within your boundary. So that is normally referred to as scope 1. In other words, normally where you are directly paying for the bill, like you are directly paying for the fuel and refrigerant, and if it is getting used during that reporting year, that is normally referred to as scope 1 emissions. Scope 2 is the purchase of energy, which is generated elsewhere. Normally, most of the in Indian scenario, it is mostly the electricity part, because purchasing heating and cooling in terms of say steam and cooling is something very limited in the Indian scenario. But nevertheless, if you are getting steam from any nearby plant and you are paying for depending upon the flow meter for that steam, then that might also be included in the scope 2 emissions. So this is scope 1 and scope 2, and all the electricity, grid electricity, except your renewable capacity, whatever captive renewable capacity if you are having, the net of from your total consumption, you have to net out that, and the balance, whatever you are drawing from the grid, that needs to be included in scope 2 emissions. Scope 3 is again, it's very important and also kind of bit tricky out of this entire in the emissions inventory. Scope 3 is about the value chain emissions, all the emissions that can be attributed to your upstream and downstream processes. And again, there are multiple different classifications inside that, which we will be discussing quickly. But nevertheless, this is a broad inventory classification. As an organization, if you are aiming for better scores across your ESG spectrum, and also want to take forward a kind of a stewardship role as far as climate change is concerned, it is expected on the global level and also global benchmarking agencies that you have to kind of properly inventorize your entire emission set, both scope 1, 2, and 3. And whatever targets and other emissions, credentials that we are talking about, say net zero, Sbta target, carbon neutrality, etc. Everything will depend upon how robust and accurate your emission inventory is. I will take next 3 or 4 slides to cover about what this scope 3 is all about, because this is something that it's kind of bit tricky for most of the organizations. So I'll take another maybe next 5 to 7 minutes to explain regarding that. So we have totally around 15 classifications, categories inside scope 3, and depending upon what is your business and what is your boundary, what are the activities that you are considering under the boundary. Some categories might be applicable to you and some might not be. But nevertheless, an organization has to do a proper screening work to see that out of these 15 categories, which of them are applicable to them, and to what percentage they are able to cover their inventory out of these 15 categories. Because once this inventory is proper, then only all the claims and counter claims related to what is your baseline, what is the target you are looking at, what is going to be the annual emission reductions, all these things comes into picture. So baseline, establishing baseline and getting the inventory number right is the first and foremost step of this entire climate stewardship process. So as I already mentioned, we have around 15 categories. There are categories that I have mentioned maybe 3 or 4 categories for each slide. I'll quickly take you through them. Maybe if you are having any doubts, you can park in the chat box, and towards the end of the presentation, maybe we can address them. So here the 3 categories that you can see in the screen are purchase goods and services, capital goods, and fuel and energy related activities. These are very obvious from the title itself. Purchase goods and services, all the goods and services that you purchase over a period of year. This is from your working capital requirements. So this is not a capital expense. These are from working capital or your raw material, like all the services that you are purchasing, etc. are included in purchase goods and services. Second category is the capital goods and services. These are the goods that have been purchased, which form the part of your capital expense, capital books. These are plants and machinery, any kind of fabrication, any kind of machinery that is kind of used over a period of time, say your buildings, etc., etc. These are covered under capital goods. So we have to kind of enumerate what is going to be the emissions that are attributed to these categories. Third one is a fuel and energy related activity. So, no, like apart from those included in scope 1 and scope 2, you might also be using another, no, like a few other fuel and energy related activities where you might not be directly paying for the fuel, but nevertheless paying in terms of say per day charge or any kind of contract payment, any kind of, you know, like a pro rata payment, etc. If you are having any such, you know, like processes that are happening where you are not directly paying for the fuel, but nevertheless, you know, if there are any indirect fuel payments involved, that will be counted in category 3. Category 4 is the upstream transportation. This is, you know, like what are the items that are being brought into your factory in terms of raw materials, you know, in terms of other items that are coming into the factory. Those are upstream transportation and distribution. Here we have to consider what is the origin and the destination, what is the tonnage, and what is the mode of transportation. So all these are important. You know, like something if you have to transport by rail might cost you, you know, much less carbon emissions compared to vis-a-vis a diesel road transport. You know, something that you have to transport by you know, like ship might cost you much less carbon emissions compared to air transport. So there are, you know, depending upon what is the mode of transport, how carbon efficient it is, there are you know, like multiple categories in that. So we have to inventorize, you know, what is the upstream transportation and distribution. Number 5 is the waste generated in operation. So if you are talking about any manufacturing process, there will be a dedicated set of waste streams, and what happens to those waste streams in terms of landfill or incineration, recycling, etc. So depending upon what is the waste and what is the process, we have multiple, you know, like emissions that are attributed to that particular category. Number 6 is the business travel. This is the employees who are traveling around the year across, no, like, either by rail, air, or, no, road transportation. 7th one is employee commuting. You have multiple locations where employees are, no, coming on a daily basis from an average distance of say 10 or 15 kilometers, and they again there is a different modal allocation. They may be coming by 4-wheeler or 2-wheeler or a company bus or train, etc. So depending upon what is their mode of transportation, you have some emissions that are attributed to employee commuting. Then there are some upstream leased assets. So as I already mentioned, there can be some assets that are you know, like which the company owns. At the same time, you might have leased some assets, you know, that on a lease basis, on a monthly lease or a daily lease basis. If there are any emissions that are attributed to those upstream leased assets, that can be included in category 8. Category 9 is the kind of counterpart of upstream transportation. It's a downstream transportation. So once the goods are manufactured, how they reach their respective destinations and godowns. So that is something is covered in downstream transportation. Then processing of sold products, that is again you know, like another important one. So whenever you're talking about any chemicals, I know like the chemical contains some inherent carbon or methane content, and if it is processed, if it is sold as an intermediary product and subsequently it is processed, we have to find out what is the innate carbon content of that particular chemical, particular product. So that is the processing of sold products is again important category specifically for chemical like segment. 11th one is the use of sold products. So whenever your product goes into the market, depending upon what the product, suppose let us take an example of textile. So when textile goes into the market, what is the average wash cycles, like over the lifetime of the product? If you're talking about cotton seed, if the average wash cycle is around 40 or 50 count, then what is the energy that is associated, energy use that is associated per wash cycle, and based on that we have to calculate what is the carbon emission that is attributed to that. Similarly, depending upon whatever product we are talking about, say chemicals, like any other, suppose let us take an example, we are manufacturing any kind of consumer durables like TV or refrigerator, then again what is the emissions like over the life of that product. So this is what like use of sold products is all about. We have to calculate what happens during the use phase of that particular product. Then category 12 is the end of life treatment of sold products. This is very similar to the waste category number 5 that we previously discussed. So basically what happens after the useful life of the product? Suppose say, like you are selling say around 50 or 100 tons of textile on an yearly basis. So what happens after these textile have been used up? It goes to landfill or it gets incinerated. What are the emissions that is attributed to that waste disposal? So that is something is covered under category 12. Category 13 is a downstream lease assets. Similar to upstream, you might have some downstream lease assets like vehicles or say your godowns or like some distribution centers, etc., which are covered under downstream lease assets. 14 and 15 no, like related to 14 is related to franchises. This might not be applicable for a manufacturing company, but nevertheless, if you are in a restaurant or like some kind of a food chain, then franchisee might be an option that you have to kind of consider for calculating your emissions. And 15th is the investments. Suppose the company has invested in another business, like it can be a manufacturing business, it can be a service business. So depending upon what is the kind of investment that you are having, suppose you're holding 20% or 30% or 50% of that business, you have to be accountable for equivalent to that much of carbon emissions. So that is something as far as investment is concerned. So these are 15 categories that we have broadly discussed for which we have to calculate or rather estimate, I would say, what is going to be the carbon emissions, and that needs to be included in your total overall pool to calculate what is your total inventory. Now we have seen about what are the modes of emissions within an organization, scope 1, 2, and 3, and in detail about scope 3. Now quickly we'll be checking what is the global paradigm as on today. What after Paris climate change deal that has been signed, in which India is also part of. And last year towards the end we had this Glasgow agreement also happening. So what is the benchmark today? What companies are vying to do? So, we'll spend next 10 minutes or two to understand how this is structured and what companies have been doing. So basically, once you have established the baseline, now the idea is to reduce your emissions. And there is a global framework that is available. It's called science-based targets. And again, as can be seen from the slide, it is an initiative of some of the leading global NGOs who are instrumental in bringing about the science-based targets. Here, the idea is to evaluate an organization based upon their inventory, scope 1, 2, 3, and guide them as to what percentage of emission reduction, depending upon what is your business and what is the sector you represent, what percentage of emission reduction will help not only them but also the globe in total to reach the emission numbers that we are looking for. Suppose we all understand there is a 1.5 degree target that the Paris climate change agreement is kind of targeting, and there is something called less than 2 degree scenario. There are multiple scenarios. These two are ideal scenarios. So science-based target actually help the companies to evaluate and understand what is the percentage of reduction that is required so that they can reach this kind of global benchmark. So this is something I tried to explain. The green line on the bottom is the 1.5 degree scenario, which is ideal, which will avoid the worst impacts of climate change, and which is what Paris climate change agreement is targeting. Then we have 2 degree. Then you have multiple other bands that you can see based on what is there for current policies and what is the baseline, etc. So the idea is that how a business can align itself to the green line, bottom green line, that is 1.5 degree, and what is the percentage reduction that is required. This number will be given if you are setting up a science-based target. These are some positives for the organizations if they want to set up a SBTA target. Some of these are very obvious. It can future-proof growth, proactive policy engagement. So right now, on a national basis, we don't have a target as such for emission reduction, although Vrsr recently has been asking what is the inventory number, etc. But there is no target as such has been set on any Indian companies. Nevertheless, there is this discussion is actively going on in the government circles that over a period of time, say 5 or 10 years down the line, the companies definitely will have a target number as to what is the maximum emission that they can emit for a reporting year. So, setting up a target or SBTA adopting Sbta framework proactively can help you meet those kind of regulatory risks over a period of time. These are the companies that are taking action. The metric is just to give you an idea that this is being considered seriously across like the global level. This is again like dated information. This is pertaining to early 2021. Right now the number is much more companies are taking part and actively considering setting up an Sbta target. Next two slides will these are again kind of framework and what is the process for setting an Sbta target. So you have to evaluate whether you are less than a 500 member company or you are pertaining to oil and gas sector, etc. If not, you have to follow the regular approach for setting up a target. If you fall under any of these special categories, you have some specific process for setting up a target. Scope 3 you have to evaluate, and if your scope 3 emissions are more than 40%, you have to set a target for scope 3 also. Normally scope 1 and 2 is should and must for all the organization, setting a target around scope 1 and 2. For scope 3, if your scope 3 total emissions are more than 40%, you have to set up a target for that also. And once the target has been set and it has been approved by the Sbta board, you have to ensure that this is monitored on an annual basis, and this needs to be reported back to the Sbta, and they will, if and all it is not following a set pattern, then they might have questions which needs to be answered satisfactorily. So the report, the target needs to be 5 to 15 year time frame. Within that you have to set a target, and scope 3, as I already explained, it needs to be if it is more than 40%, you have to set a scope 3 target. There are certain options that are available for organization to set up an Sbta target depending upon which sector you represent. Absolute emission contraction is something where you have to reduce your emissions absolutely. Suppose after an inventory you figure out your emission total 1, 2, and 3 is around 1 lakh tons. So then absolute emission means you have to bring that down to 50% or 40% depending upon what is the number you are getting in the Sbta calculations. Next one is the sectoral decarbonization. This is again applicable only for certain sectors. Here we have to reduce the intensity. Like suppose for example, like your if you're a steel manufacturing company, then your emission intensity might be 5 tons of carbon dioxide per ton of steel. So there you have to bring down the emission intensity of the product. Last one is the economic intensity. In other words, it means what is the ton of carbon emission per crore or per million of revenue. So these are the three options available. These are just an explanation for the in the interest of time I'll be skipping them, but nevertheless there are some specific nuances and set procedures for companies to adopt when they are setting up their target. You have sectoral decarbonization, and sectoral decarbonization, as I said, it's only applicable for certain sectors, not for others. Most of the companies have to use absolute contraction approach. Last one is the economic intensity contraction. This is the last option available. Unless or until your business cannot adopt the first two, then only you have to go for the last one, because the accuracy of this method is kind of bit less compared to others. It's kind of less robust. So here the options and like prioritization is being given. If available, use sectors based approach. If you fall under any of those 5 or 6 categories, you have to use that. If it is not, you have to go absolute based approach. Even if that is not applicable to you, or if you are not able to set an absolute target, then you have to go for economic intensity, which is the last option. There's a brief about how can companies engage. So basically, if you want to set up a Sbta target for your organization, first and foremost, you have to do a proper inventory of your scope 1 to 3, establish your baseline number. That will be step 1. Step 2 is that you have to submit an intent letter to Sbta board telling that you want to set up an Sbta target, like depending upon whether your ambition is 1.5 degrees or less than 2 degrees. These are the only 2 scenarios that are available. You can set that intent, send the intent letter to Sbta board. Subsequent to that, like you are given a period of around 2 years within which you have to develop the target, develop action plan, and submit your documentation to the Sbta board. Then afterwards, once it has been submitted, SBTA board will take a month or two to verify what is your claim, and once it has been approved, your name of organization will be visible on the website, along with the target that you have set for yourself. So this is something that is accessible to everyone, and it's also a kind of a message to the global stakeholders to see that you are really serious about your climate action, and you really want to kind of bring change to what is the status quo. Then you can communicate your SBTA target to all your stakeholders and disclose on an annual basis. Now, this is more like a verification and checking mechanism that happens on an annual basis. These are certain tools and resources. Again, maybe we'll circulate the presentation, so I'll not go into in detail in this. This is a snapshot of the tool that we might have to will be using for setting up the target. You will be giving your scope 1 and 2 numbers, and based on what is your total emissions, you will be getting your target. So now this is as far as SBTI is concerned. So any organization who are willing to kind of go in a reduction pathway, they have to set up an SBTI target. Now let us take a few minutes to understand what is net zero is all about. Because net zero is of a kind of a bit recent development, and this is something that is built on top of SBTA. So unless or until you have already set SBTA, you might not go for a net zero. So SBTA is like a first step for you to aspire for a net zero organization. So this is a broad definition of net zero. So basically, here you have to one is that you have to set an 1.5 degree aligned pathway target, SBTA target, and afterwards whatever balance emissions that are there, you have to reduce it to a residual level. Residual level means out of your total inventory, you have to go all the way up to 90% reduction. That is what a residual level is all about. And whatever neutralizing, whatever the balance 10% is 10% is present, you have to neutralize that with emission reduction sales, where maybe buying offsets or doing any kind of system wide emission reduction activities. You can offset that. But before that, before going for the offset option, you have to reduce your emissions by 90%. So this is what net zero is all about. These are the key elements of net zero. Suppose you want to claim yourselves as a net zero organization. First and foremost is that you have to set up a SBTA target aligned with 1.5 degree. If you have set a long-term target, that is something like maybe over a period of 15 years or something, then you have to set even a smaller near-term target also. Like it shouldn't be like that. Like you will be doing all your emission reduction only after 15 years, and you might not be doing any activity for next say 7 to 10 years. That should not be the case. You have to set a 5 to 10 year like middle near-term target, then the long-term target that should align with 1.5 degrees. And whatever the residual emissions that are there, you have to neutralize them. And apart from that, you also need to kind of have initiatives within your organization to mitigate the emissions even beyond value chain. Suppose say you are a pioneer in like chemical industry or a pioneer in textile, you have to ensure that you are also helping fellow organizations, maybe through a cluster based approach, or through some kind of industry association based approach. You also have to help other organizations, that is beyond value chain mitigation. That also something you should be instrumental in. So all these steps needs to be done for an organization to achieve a net zero status as per Sbta. So this is what broadly I thought of covering. Like we started with the inventory part, then we came to the Sbta, and as a last leg we have covered the net zero part of it.
Thanks, Arun, and I think that's from our side. I think, Arun, there is some question in the chat that I'm seeing. So if you want to respond on that, you can. Otherwise, we are open for the questions considering the time. To take any questions, please.
Yes, sir. There is one question, the last one, how to decide baseline
Yeah.
for setting science-based target. So baseline is your inventory. What for which year you are preparing inventory. For example, suppose you are preparing full-fledged inventory for the financial year 22 and 23. And this is again, you should be a normal business cycle. It should not be like a COVID year or like some kind of a downturn year. It should be a normal, as a part of your normal business cycle. If that is the case, you can prepare a full-fledged inventory of your carbon inventory of your organization for that particular reporting year, and that can be considered as baseline for setting up a science-based target.
Yes.
There's another question from Nikul. I don't, if you've seen it, but it says if we do BSR reporting, will it improve?
BRSR.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will it improve
Yeah.
our ESG
Yeah.
score?
Yeah, I have answered it that because BRSR is based on ESG. So if the companies are able to fulfill the requirements which is given in BRSR, definitely it will give a better ESG score because it is talking about which I showed in the slide, section A, section B, section C. So I think another part with BRSR is that now it is the sort of Indian version of ESG sort of uh, framework, if you say. As of now, most of the ESG things have been all have been the foreign agencies which have been doing it. So I think SEBI has come out with this BRSR, which is aligned to the ESG ratings that the external agencies do. So it should definitely lead to the increment in the score.
Thank you, Shikhar. Thanks, Shikhar. Are there any more questions? Anybody at GHCL? Because I don't think we have any more questions. If we do, then we'll surely get in touch with you, Shikhar, for the response. Yeah. I would now like to ask Mr. Sunil Bhatnagar. He is one of the senior members of our team and is an advisor right now. And I would like him to just say a few words about his experience today. So over to you.
Thank you, Deepika. Thank you, Shikhar. Thank you, Arun Prakash. Really, really nice, enlightening session. One thing for the GSCL team is that if you guys have gone through the detailed, presentation of Shikhar, and you can understand that ESG is no longer an ornamental showpiece. This is now required for long-term fruitful existence of an organization. Not only required, it is now mandated. Shikhar, the only good thing is that, like you mentioned, is that GHCL has already started its GSG journey, and we are already doing an integrated report. So there is some level of understanding the importance of the whole piece. But to everyone, like I said, this environmental and societal, as Shikhar rightly put it, these two concerns are something that are now going to be part of every business growth. And if you're not conscious of that, then you will fall by the wayside. The leadership team is very conscious about it. I know for certain that we have gone to certain lengths to even try and set up science-based targets for various things. But the team members will appreciate that we have a long way to go to get to a net zero kind of a situation. And the importance of what Arun said, that even your connected businesses, I mean, a go down emissions of a go down of stock somewhere in the wilderness, even that has to be added back to your net score. So the relevance of being non-wasteful in any energy consumption and also having zero discharge, etc. later is going to be very, very pertinent. So thank you very much, Shikhar. Thank you very much, Arun, for a very relevant and nice, precise talk. It was very nice to be engaged. And to the team, a request that keep this on the top of your notepads. Everybody in their will have to play a role and be responsible for some sort of emission reduction or whatever we may call it at whatever stage. We being in the chemical industry, and Shikhar has rightly said, there are other chemical industries like UPL and Tata Chemicals who already embarked and are a long way on this journey. So I'm sure GHCL will do it, but great to hear from you the importance of it. Thank you, Shikhar, and thank you, Arun.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deepika.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Shikhar. Thank you, Arun. Thank you, sir, once again. And thank you, everybody else, for joining us. Have a great day.
Yep. Best of luck.